I am David Sanford of Sanford Heisler Sharp McKnight, chairman of a national civil rights law firm, and I am delighted to be here today with John McKnight. John McKnight is a partner in our firm, and he resides and works out of the D.C. office, and he is co-chair of our National Whistleblower False Claims Act qui tam practice. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have never had an opportunity really to spend a lot of time together drilling down on your life. This is the time.
Yeah.
We're going to do that. So take me through your early life. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? What were some formative influences in your life early on?
Well, I was born in D.C. And I lived there until I was about 12. I went to Catholic school. I went to a school called Annunciation on Mass Avenue in D.C. It was a really comfortable kind of mixed environment. One of my best friends was the son of the Colombian ambassador, which is sort of a really D.C. kind of thing. So we only got to be together for around 3 years because that's how long ambassadors stick around. But and then I had other friends I had a pretty mixed group of friends growing up. Around that time, I think I spent most of my time with my brother Devin. So we would take the metro bus home every day, starting I think in around kindergarten, and all the way through 5th grade. So taking the metro bus, they still run the same bus lines that they used to run back then. And we moved out to Silver Spring, Maryland. Basically, I think they were trying to get us out into the suburbs in preparation to go to high school. Because the suburbs in D.C. have much better public high schools than the public schools in D.C. I think that was the idea. I actually started off though. In middle school, I went to public school for 3 years, and then I started off at Georgetown Prep in high school. In college, I went to the University of Michigan, and I liked it there. I think that was a good choice. I only applied to like 3 or 4 schools. I applied to Maryland, Michigan, I think Penn and Brown. At some point in time, I applied to UVA. I don't remember whether that was a transfer or was that my original application package, but I got into all 3 of the public schools. I didn't get into Brown and Penn. And so I just decided that Michigan felt best. I thought Virginia felt a little too country. It just didn't really feel like kind of vibe I was going to like. And, I met all of my best friends all there. I'm still friends with all those guys. And, I don't really keep in touch with my high school friends, but all my college friends, I pretty much still my friends.
You wound up going to law school. Were there any key moments in your life or seminal influences that led you to law?
I mean, honestly, it was really more a matter of I was in grad school in New York doing a writing program, and I couldn't. One of the issues was the whole point of the program. You're in this workshop is that you're trying to create a thesis, which is essentially a novel or a long form nonfiction or whatever you focus in. And at the time, there was a big focus on essentially getting 350 to 400 pages, and I had 200. And I was just kind of looking around and seeing that, as much as I tried to get more mentorship and trying to figure out how to get it from 200 to 350, I was really just sort of stuck out on an island. And I think that sort of made me think I needed to pivot into a place where I can actually find someone who will, show me where to go, because I'm 22 years old. I don't know what I'm doing. And also then the economy crashed. So it was 2008, or I guess 2007 or 2008. And so that's when I started to think about other options. I started thinking about foreign, what do you call it? I guess it was like international relations and law school. And I think really the reason was because my dad had always told me that you can probably do the same things you'd be doing with the international relations with a law degree. My focus was really more international relations at the time. It was really just because, I had just been hanging out my whole life around people with international backgrounds. It was really easy for me to slide in and out of different communities. And, so that was a comfortable kind of place for me. And so I figured that's where I would start. I took some of those classes in college. And I figured, well, I'd look for some law schools that also have international programs. And yeah, that led me to Maryland, essentially because, I didn't apply to very many programs again. It was, it was a quick decision, one that I made essentially because I needed to, get going in a new direction. And then, and also because of the crash, and so I got a pretty hefty scholarship from Maryland, plus it was in state.
So you wound up, doing the law in law school. You wound up coming out and evolving into one of the nation's leading practitioners in a niche area of the law, whistleblower, what's often called False Claims Act cases or key tam cases. First of all, what are those areas of the law generally, and how did you find your way in it?
Well, they're I usually describe them as bounty statutes. I think that's sort of the when I'm talking to lay folks, I usually that usually kind of gets to the heart of the what we do. And what it is you have a statute, a law that essentially kind of it allows for rewards for whistleblowers who have information on various different types of fraud. And so then you sort of pair the whistleblower statutes, the bounty statutes, with some illegality from another statute. And so that when you have a violation of that other statute, you can pair it with the whistleblower statute often, and then you can kind of figure out how you can get a bounty from your information. And I got into that, I guess, in law school because I think in law school, I don't remember when exactly, but my dad had the NetApps settlement for $128 million. And so he had been doing it for a minute.
And your dad is Vince McKnight, also co-chair of the practice in
Right.
D.C. in our firm with you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess for a while, because I was doing my own thing, and I was in New York for a bit, which is an all-consuming life generally. I didn't really pay too much attention, but by the time I had gotten to law school, sometime around, I'm guessing it was probably about my 2L year, is when he had the NetApp settlement, and then he started his own firm. And so then in my winter breaks, summer breaks, spring break, random breaks throughout the year, I would write briefs for him, write other, letters and stuff like that just in my spare time. I always had jobs throughout law school. It made I always sort of preferred work over school. I've never been much of an academic person. I know I have degrees, but the work is easier for me than the school was. So I tried to spend as much time as possible, particularly in law school, working. I did the same thing in college, really. I usually was working probably 25 to 30 hours a week. It felt more natural. I felt more comfortable on the job, than in the classroom. And so in all of law school, I think the second they said they used to have a rule about not having any jobs, I think, in your first semester or your first year or something like that. So I didn't get to have my first job until the summer. But in my off time, I would still write for my dad. And so, I guess I found the corporate crime kind of stuff, pretty interesting. I find the sort of solving the puzzle of missing information and trying to figure out what the story is based on very limited information very interesting. I actually found doc reviewing sometimes a lot really interesting, just because it's sort of like you're in a like in The Big Short or like Margin Call, and you're just a fly on the wall. and you're reading all the emails that they're sending while this thing is happening. And you can, and with that extra context, even the most mundane emails seem actually kind of interesting. And so I enjoyed sort of that more investigative process a lot. That's what I got to be a part of early on. You know, you're putting together summary judgment oppositions and things like that. Got to go through all those emails and, you know, all kinds of other documents. You can actually kind of start seeing the tension between various different people as, you know, as his frauds are unfolding and stuff. And the story starts to build even when they're not talking about it directly. And I always found that kind of stuff pretty compelling. It was, you know, there's a puzzle there. And yeah, and because you don't have all the facts, you know, just at your disposal immediately, you got to figure out what else you have to get. You got to play a little bit of detective. And so at the earlier, you know, stages of your career, sort of, I guess in law school, I was starting to already do kind of associate level work, you know, and because I was writing briefs and stuff like that. And but I, you know, I did regular jobs too. I worked for, I think, 3 judges, Judge Kennedy, I think Judge William Jackson, and Magistrate Judge Deborah Robinson. Pretty sure I had at least one more job. I worked for the WHO too. That was a big one.
For what now?
The WHO in Geneva. I did that, and that was a really great experience. I got to sit in on the General Assembly often, you know, interact with diplomats and people like that working on human rights issues, which was, you know, sort of, you know, in line with my initial goals. But you know, I did find that it did feel like they were you in terms of, you know, actually getting things done. You didn't necessarily feel like at the UN that you were getting anything done all the time. A lot of times we would have meetings that would last for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And the end of the meeting, we are setting up another meeting. And that might be every day of the week sometimes, you know. And so there was definitely a part of me that was thinking, well, you know, there's maybe some other type of role or some type of organization might be better. You know, but I was always working, you know, sort of one foot in, you know, whistleblower work, one foot in, you know, whatever other job I had, you know.
So how did it come about that you came to our firm back in, I can't believe it, 12 years ago? It's been a dozen years,
Yeah.
2014. You and your dad, Vince McKnight, came in and really started our KETAM, our False Claims Act, our whistleblower practice in Washington, D.C., expanding it nationwide. How did that come about?
Well, as I remember, we were working together. The two firms were our firm and your firm at the time. Were working on the Smith and Nephew case, and that was literally my entire life, pretty much for like 3 years. You know, I pretty much just woke up and ate, slept, drank Smith and Nephew, doc review, briefs, every brief. For a long time at McKnight and Kennedy, me and my dad and Altemes were working together. Pretty much any written product coming out of the office was just me, you know.
So at that point, you had a firm with your dad, Vince McKnight, and Altemes Kennedy, McKnight and Kennedy, doing whistleblower cases, right? Doing exactly what you're doing now. And at some point, you and your dad and Altemes Kennedy came to us in 2014, started the practice for our firm, and it really has blossomed into a national powerhouse. I mean, if you Google best lawyers in the whistleblower space, you come up, Vince comes up, Altemes Kennedy comes up, our firm comes up regularly. How did all that happen?
Well, I think it was a lot of hard work, dedication, and sort of a you know, you buy in. You know, I think that's really the big part of it is you have to decide it's going to work. It doesn't matter what else there is, it's going to work. And I think a big part of it is frankly, I think it's working for your family. It's like, you know, you are a family, and you know, we believed in the projects, we believed in the cases, and I didn't see it as an option to not win some of these and not keep the business going. I don't think Vince, my dad, thought of that as an option either. And so, we are always looking for how do you're trying to get your cases to work on one hand, but you're also, you're every time you're gonna take a punch, you got to figure out, what am I going to take from this? How am I going to adjust the practice? Because I'm certainly not going to make the same mistake two times. Because if I make the same mistake two times, my family suffers. It's more than just like, well, I didn't do a good job. It's like, I'm removing food from my family's table, and so we took it very seriously, and so, there was really, to me, no choice. It had to work, and so, we brought it home. We would you'd go to work together a lot of times and then ride back. Don't really stop. You literally talking about these cases pretty much all day and night, and finding ways to get. At the time, some of those theories were fairly novel. I think they might actually be pretty popular now, but we had like that case, for instance, was a Trade Agreements Act case, and involving products from China that were mislabeled. But back then that was less controversial, I guess. And so we were trying to find ways to make the violations more clear, for the court, and develop ways to get the right documentation out of the defendants. They were still in a place where it was effective to argue that you're making us produce some million pages of documentation, and that whole spiel. And so you had to be kind of clever, and then you had to find clever ways to find the emails and documents that you needed to get the case done, and also get the right queries so that the defendant would know we know where this thing is. And I think eventually we got to the point where, if I remember correctly, we had sort of developed a series of queries or requests that we were pretty certain was going to get, sort of the smoking gun documents. And then I think they came to the table, and I think there was a few other cases at the time too. I don't remember. It's hard to remember because it's been such a long time what those were, but that was the one that I think that we were working on most intensely. That and the Office Depot David Sherwin case that we settled on maybe like 2 or 3 years after we got into Sanford Heisler. And
that settlement was for how much?
That was for $68 million. Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, those were sort of the two cases that I remember sort of marking that period of transitioning from the smaller firm into Sanford Heisler. And I'm pretty sure actually like that settlement actually sort of finished up like sometime within the first few weeks of us joining the firm. I remember having the phone calls, bickering with the AUSAs and the government attorneys about attorneys' fees, and sitting in Vince's office, in the back of the DuPont Circle place, and and that sort of started the next chapter.
Mm-hmm. So when you think back on the last 12 years, what single case or what 2 or 3 cases stand out the most as illustrative of not only a great success, but the kind of work and dedication you and the team do?
Well, I would say one of them is the Wells Fargo case. That was, I remember basically all of it, from day one all the way through. I remember when the call came in. I remember what time of day it was. I remember, what time of year it was, what the weather was like. I remember the first time I met Michael in person. He was wearing one of these like 90s style leather jackets with the lapels.
And Michael is who?
Michael Bacon, our client. And we met in Philadelphia. And it was just really bizarre. We were all staying at the same hotel. It was this really bizarre, like 70s style hotel, which I'm sure was really cool back then. But when we got there at the time, it was like it was just kind of weird looking, But we ate at this fantastic French restaurant. I remember that. And then the next day we went to go, meet with the government. It was probably a good 30 to 40 agents and prosecutors in the room. There was another 20 to 30 on videos. There was like 4 or 5 large screen TVs, and they're all full of people. And, and the client really, we hadn't really seen that type of investigation, been in the middle of it, that intense of an investigation. They asked for it to meet with us, and maybe it was like a week or two after they got our materials. And, there's, I think one of the interesting things about that part is you see the potential of the case, you see the potential of the client, and then you see everybody else as they're kind of thinking that this could be the guy who gets it done. And then the client actually does exactly what you want him to do. He was a star, and everything worked out perfectly. What we said to try to prepare him for everything, it worked, and I think that's one of those things that kind of gives you a little bit more faith in your work. You gave someone some advice, they took it, and they sort of, they hit a home run, and that investigation went on for, I think, another 3 to 4 years. We were probably having meetings with various government agents and investigators, maybe like once every 3 months, something like that, for a long time, either flying back and forth to San Francisco or South Dakota a few times, Philadelphia a few times, and really just being sort of right in the middle of maybe a 5 or 6 agency, national, large-scale criminal and civil investigation. And it really sort of, I think, defined the way I started to look at how these investigations come together, how they work, how they look in the process, and it definitely sort of colored the way I started to look at what we should be doing later, because how they operate now. You can see how they interact with someone who they need something from, in a case that they want to actually finish.
Right. So what was the result of that case?
Well, the government collectively settled for about five billion, I think, five or 6 billion, depending on I guess which settlements you want to include. And I think there was maybe some 3 to 4 billion from DOJ. I think there was 500 million from the SEC, another 1.5 billion from the OCC, I think, and a whole host of individual prosecutions and fines too, which was actually kind of a big deal because they never do that. And so they fined the former CEO of Wells Fargo of $17 million and banned him from banking. And they did the same thing for several of the executives, and these were actually friends of our of our client. People who he didn't want to say anything about their involvement for a long time, but as he kept being involved in the investigation, you would see that he kind of noticed, I think, that they weren't telling him the whole truth, and they sort of left him out to dry. They weren't really his friends the same way he thought they were.
Right.
And
often the case.
Yeah, and I think that actually really hurt his feelings.
Right.
And so in those later years, he kind of came to the conclusion that, like, yeah, they weren't really with him on the same team.
Well, it's a great tribute to your hard work, your dedication, your vision, your leadership in the firm and nationwide in this practice to get that kind of result. If we had a lot more time, we'd discuss a lot more successes, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for all the work you do. And it's been a pleasure talking with you here today.
Yeah, thanks. The pleasure is all mine.
Thank you.
Thanks.